Welcome to Two Pete's in a Podcast, where we will talk about child health from birth right away through to adolescence, dealing with issues of illness, development, and everything else that is of importance. Hello and welcome to Two Pete's in a Podcast. This is our very first podcast, and it will be on fevers. And the two peds in the podcast are myself, Dr. Simon Strawn.
And me, Dr. Michael Platten.
Today we'll be covering fevers in three basic topics. We'll talk about what a normal body temperature is, what temperature equals a fever, and what the warning signs are that you look for when your child has a fever. Pick a scenario. So we're going to say it's, Mike, 10 o'clock at night. And you're the parent and you've woken up and your child's miserable and you go to your child and your child is perspiring and clearly very warm.
Like hot. Previously, they were fine. They went to bed perfectly well and then they're just terribly hot. I can cook an egg on them. And you don't know what to do. Why are they sick? Where do you go from here?
So now the first thought obviously is that your child has a fever. And what does that mean? So for now, let's talk about that. So what does a fever mean? A fever means that your child's body is responding to something that has infected it. Can we start off by saying that teething does not cause fevers?
You're starting the beginning. Our first podcast with saying teething does not cause fevers.
Yes.
I agree. Not more than 38. Not more than 38.
100%.
So wait, what is a normal fever?
Well, if you're using a thermometer and you're using that thermometer either in the ear.
It's an infrared thermometer, not.
Well, it's an infrared thermometer.
Please not a digital one in the ear.
Yeah.
Cause trauma.
So anything over 38, I would say, is a fever that you should possibly consider doing something about.
Mm. So a normal fever being 36 to 37.5.
Yeah.
With 37.5 to 38 being that little gray zone where you're not too sure what's going on. Something might be happening, something might. There we just monitor.
Right.
Mm. Okay. So what you might see your child having in terms of clinical signs is that obviously they're feeling hot. They might have very cold hands and feet. And sometimes we even get moms saying that their children are shaking. And like you can stop the shaking, but they're shaking. It's like they're cold. And they're very miserable. Like Simon, you said, they are perspiring or sweating. And their heart will be beating faster. They'll be breathing faster. And that is all a normal process in fevers. Because a fever is increasing your body's metabolism or the rate at which it uses energy to try and make more heat. Just like when you're at gym, you start exercising, you get warmer, you start sweating, and the same happens with a fever.
So now the thing as well, though, Mike, is that a lot of the things you've just mentioned would also be symptoms of a chest infection or an ear infection, and the child then would also be miserable and perspiring and breathing quickly. So what we should possibly do is say, when your child has a fever, let's say that's the first thing you've noticed. So number one, it's only a fever.
Which you get quite commonly.
Yes.
There's just a fever, nothing else.
So then what are we going to do? We're going to have a look at the fever and say, let's control the fever. Mm-hmm. And once we've got the fever controlled, then look to see if there are any other symptoms. So if your child just has a fever, your child didn't go to bed with diarrhea or vomiting, and your child at the moment is not having diarrhea or vomiting, the child has not had a sign of having a snotty nose, which has now developed into a bad cough with a fever. We're talking about the situation where you have a healthy child who went to bed and who's woken up with a fever. Mm. And when the child has that fever, it may have all those symptoms that you've mentioned, but there was nothing kind of leading up to it. So in that situation, if the mom phones, we're going to go, question one, have you measured the fever? How's your child looking?
I think it's important to ask, how did they measure the fever?
So why is that important?
So the temperature that you measure changes based on where you do it. What we
like use, in the kitchen or the bathroom, you mean?
Where on the body and where in the world you're doing it, yes. So if you're doing it up the bum, we say rectal temperature, that's what we call the core temperature or the actual accurate body temperature. Now,
but then you're using a digital thermometer,
specifically
specifically designed for rectal use.
Yes. Please, not just any, it needs to be a rectal thermometer. Now, you can also do the temperature under the arm with a digital thermometer, but there we would tend to add either 0.5 or a degree more. So if you're measuring 37 under the arm, it might be 37.5 or 38. If you're doing it in the ear, then I'm happy to say it's very similar to the core temperature, but it needs to be done properly. And we'll go into this in part 3.
Okay, so if you've measured the temperature with a rectal thermometer or with an infrared thermometer in the ear, you're saying that the normal is up to 37.5. Whereas if you've done it under the arm, the normal is up to, let's say, 37. So if you're getting a fever that's 38, then we're saying that should be an indication that there may be something going on. There may be an infection starting. So what are we going to do about it?
So that we're going to be talking about how to treat the fever in part 4. We're also going to I think we should talk about when to be concerned.
Yes.
Right now. Get that off.
Well, start. So let's hear.
Yeah. So when you need to be concerned is if you have a child that is less than 3 months with a fever of more than 38 degrees. You don't do anything other than come straight to see your medical practitioner. Because we do not want a child less than 3 months to have a fever.
Correct.
Don't give medication. Don't give paracetamol. Nothing. Just make an appointment and go see your medical practitioner, your provider. So the other thing that we're worried about is if they are too lethargic to drink, because with fevers, they can dehydrate very quickly. We need to make sure that they are adequately hydrated. So if they're drinking nicely, then we're happy.
This is, again, children over 3 months.
Over 3 months, yes.
Under 3 months, there's no additional
Regardless.
stuff. Regardless. If there's a fever under 3 months, rather be seen.
Yeah.
Over 3 months, if there's a fever, we can, and there is something else. So can we make it as simple as that?
Yes.
So if there's a fever plus something. So if there's a fever plus diarrhea and vomiting.
Yeah.
Fever plus rash. Fever plus lethargy, lethargic, not waking up, not feeding properly. Fever plus rapid breathing where you can see the rib cage kind of moving in and out and bad coughing.
Or when they're uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I think the last point about that is perhaps if your child has a fever and you as the parent are really concerned, even though you may not feel that you can put your finger on it, maybe it's the first time your child's ever had this fever. It's always better. Rather get it checked out. You know, we're available. People are available to help. There's no need to be sitting at home panicking about something.
Or Googling.
Well, or Googling.
Googling gives you a good idea of what's going on to a certain extent, but they need to, when they write something for Google, is to cover all eventualities.
That's right.
And they say that your child is exceptionally sick and needs to be seen, or it could just be something mild. But that is where we come in as medical practitioners. We can help direct you in the right way. Say, okay, this is what we're worried about. This is what we're not worried about. Do you agree?
I do. So I think let's just recap very quickly. So we're saying in the eventuality that your child is really hot to the touch and you've done taken the temperature and you can see that your child is miserable, a bit shaky, a bit sweaty, clearly there's fever. Now what do? Step 1, what else is going on? If it is just a fever, we'll deal with that. But if it's a fever and your child is under 3 months or has other symptoms on top of the fever, that is when I would say rather get your child seen.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think that's a nice little end off to our first part. So if your children have allowed you to, thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you found this of value, please be sure to sign up to our email list at www.careforkids.co.za, and that's the numeral 4, and subscribe in your favorite podcast app or follow us on Facebook.
At 2 Peas in a Podcast.
At 2 Peas in a Podcast.
TWO, not the numerical 2.
This is our disclaimer. The information we have given you in this podcast is our own personal professional opinion. We're giving it to you for your own information. Please don't use it to treat yourself or to treat anybody else. Rather, go and see your own medical healthcare provider and follow their advice.